This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
I'm excited to be here.
Today we're going back to the 1940s
Okay.
to explore World War II's impact on women's roles here in America.
All right.
And, a big question for us today is, did this period of immense change plant the seeds for the later fight for equality? So to really dig into that question,
Yeah.
we're going to be using a lot of different sources today.
Okay.
Historical data, for sure.
Of course.
First-hand accounts.
Really interesting to hear those.
And we've also got varying perspectives from historians.
Sounds like a fascinating journey. Because the war completely reshaped things for women.
Yeah.
I mean, it created opportunities, but also unexpected challenges.
So let's rewind the clock a little bit.
Okay.
Before the war, it was pretty much June Cleaver in every household, right?
Well,
You know-
pre-war America, women were largely confined to the domestic sphere.
Yeah.
Work opportunities were limited,
Right.
often low-paying, and certainly not seen as a path to empowerment.
Yeah.
And the numbers kind of show that, too. In 1940, only about 25% of women were part of the workforce.
Wow, so then World War II erupts
Right.
and throws everything into chaos.
Absolutely.
Millions of men off fighting.
Yeah,
And that creates a huge labor shortage here at home.
exactly.
So that's where women step up.
Right. Absolutely. They really stepped up to fill that void,
Yeah.
taking on roles that had always been seen as men's work.
Yeah.
Factories, shipyards,
Wow.
even working as mechanics in munitions production.
It's incredible.
Historians even call this a crisis of opportunity for women.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Yeah.
A crisis of opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I imagine it must have been a huge shift in mindset.
Yeah.
Was it just patriotic duty, or was there something more at play?
Well, I mean, patriotism definitely played a role, but it was also just necessity. So many men overseas, women had to take on these jobs to keep the country running.
To keep things going?
Yeah, and the scale of their involvement is just astonishing.
Yeah.
By 1944, okay.
Women's labor force participation had jumped to almost 30%.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah, in just a few years.
Yeah.
And it really shows how crucial they became to the war effort.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, the image of Rosie the Riveter
Oh, yeah.
really captures that.
For sure.
But it's just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, Rosie's kind of become this symbol for a whole generation of women
Right.
who challenged traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
But women were doing all sorts of jobs.
Oh, yeah.
They were welders, electricians,
Yeah.
even pilots.
Wow.
And, Studs Terkel captured this beautifully in his book,
Right.
The Good War.
Mm-hmm.
He interviewed a woman who described working during the war as like this taste of freedom,
Wow.
a chance to make her own decisions and earn her own wage.
I mean, I bet that sense of agency must have been so powerful.
Absolutely, especially in a society that had always confined women
Right.
to these specific roles.
And, I mean, it wasn't just filling jobs, right?
Right. It sounds like it was a fundamental shift in how women saw themselves
Definitely.
and their place in society.
Yeah, for many women, this was the first time they experienced true economic independence.
Right.
And it really shifted their self-perception,
Yeah.
their expectations for the future.
Makes you wonder if this is where the seeds for the later women's movement were sown.
It's fascinating to think about. But then the war ends,
Right.
and all those soldiers come home.
Yeah.
What happens then? Was there pressure for women to go back to their pre-war lives?
Right. Like, was it, okay, you did your part.
Right, exactly.
Now go back to the way things were.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
There was immense societal pressure for them to return to their domestic roles,
Right.
to step aside, make way for the returning men.
It's almost like their contributions were being erased.
Yeah, it's complicated,
Yeah.
but there was a definite push to reassert traditional gender roles.
I mean, the numbers reflect that.
They do. By 1946, women's participation in the workforce had dropped back down to 27.8%,
Wow.
almost to pre-war levels.
That's a pretty stark drop.
It is.
Does that mean women just quietly accepted this return to domesticity?
Well, not exactly.
Yeah.
It's important to remember these women had experienced something profound during the war.
Yeah.
They'd tasted independence,
Yeah.
They'd contributed to society in such a meaningful way.
Right.
Those experiences wouldn't just be forgotten.
So even though they might have left the workforce,
Yeah.
the impact of those wartime experiences remained.
They did.
And I'm curious about those experiences.
Yeah.
Did they have any concrete impacts? Did female veterans have the same opportunities as their male counterparts?
Sadly, no.
Oh.
Even though they played these crucial roles during the war, they faced huge obstacles when it came to accessing benefits.
Like what?
Like the GI Bill,
Okay.
which was designed to help returning veterans transition back to civilian life.
Right. To help them, get back on their feet.
Yeah. Exactly, providing financial assistance for things like education housing.
Yeah, to get them going again.
Yeah. But female veterans were often denied these benefits.
Well.
A stark example of this enduring gender bias.
Wow.
That continued even after the war.
It feels like one step forward, two steps back.
In some ways, yes.
Yeah.
But those steps forward,
Yeah.
Those wartime experiences weren't completely erased.
So how did this all play out in the long run?
Yeah.
Is there like a direct connection between those wartime shifts and the later fight for women's equality?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Historians have debated it for decades.
And we're going to dive into that question right after this.
It's fascinating. Despite all that pressure to go back to those pre-war roles, the experience of working during the war, it really had a profound impact on how women saw themselves, their potential.
It seems like society was trying to put them back in a box, but the lid wouldn't quite shed anymore.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The war cracked that box open.
Yeah.
They tasted economic independence, proven their capabilities. They weren't satisfied anymore.
With just being wives and mothers.
Exactly. They yearned for more.
Yeah.
They yearned for equality.
That makes sense. I mean, once you've experienced freedom and autonomy, it's hard to forget it.
Yeah.
Or to go back.
Exactly. And that's where we see these seeds of change start to take root.
Okay.
Despite those setbacks, of the immediate post-war period, those wartime experiences really laid the groundwork for the women's rights movement that would come later.
So would you say this sense of agency you're describing?
Yeah.
This is what laid the groundwork for the later women's movement?
It's a complex question, but the connection's undeniable.
Like, did those Rosies become the feminists of the 60s and 70s?
Well, it wasn't exactly a straight line from Rosie to the feminist movement, but the 1950s, for example.
Traditional gender roles were very much emphasized.
Right back to the way things were.
But beneath the surface, you know, those seeds of change were still there, just waiting to sprout.
I can see that. On the one hand, you have these TV shows, these advertisements depicting the, the happy housewife in her domestic sphere.
Exactly. But remember, a lot of those housewives had worked during the war.
Right.
They'd experienced a different reality.
Yeah.
And they carried that with them.
So when did things start to shift again? Was there a specific event?
Not really a single event.
Okay.
It was more of a gradual building of momentum.
Okay.
Those women who'd worked during the war, they were now raising families of their own, sharing their experiences with their daughters, instilling in them a sense of possibility and ambition.
It's like each generation standing on the shoulders of the one before.
Exactly. And as more women entered higher education.
And the workforce in the 1960s, those ideas about equality and opportunity, they really started to take hold.
And of course, you have the 60s.
Right.
Huge social and political upheaval.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, anti-war protests.
Absolutely.
It seems like questioning the status quo was not only acceptable, but expected.
Right. And the women's movement was part of that.
Yeah.
Part of that push for social justice.
So how did this translate into actual concrete change?
Well,
did any laws or policies come about
definitely
because of this push for women's rights?
One of the most significant milestones was the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which aimed to eliminate wage discrimination based on sex.
The idea that women were paid less for doing the same work?
I know, it's crazy, right?
It's mind-boggling.
It's a testament to how far we've come.
Yeah.
And a direct result of the advocacy of so many women who'd been fighting for this for decades.
And it's interesting, the Equal Pay Act comes just 2 decades after World War II.
Right.
Is that a coincidence?
Some historians argue that the war, by forcing women into the workforce, helped create the conditions for this type of legislation. The war essentially exposed the inequalities and hypocrisies
of the system as it was.
Exactly.
So maybe those wartime experiences cracked the foundation of gender inequality.
Yeah.
And then the women's movement in the 60s came along.
Right.
And pried it open even wider.
That's a great way to put it.
And it wasn't just equal pay, right?
Right.
The movement also fought for access to education.
Yeah.
Reproductive rights. And ended discrimination.
Absolutely, in all areas of life.
A truly transformative period.
It was.
But even with all this progress,
yeah,
I'm sure there were still challenges along the way.
Of course, progress is rarely a straight line.
Yeah.
There were plenty who resisted these changes.
Right.
Who clung to those traditional views.
Yeah. It's amazing to think how much has changed in a few generations. But we still grapple with gender equality today.
We do.
It makes you wonder what those women who worked so hard during the war would think of the world we live in today.
That's a thought-provoking question.
Yeah.
They paved the way for so much progress, but I'm sure they would also recognize that the fight is far from over.
Yeah. Their courage and determination
in
the face of so much adversity is inspiring.
It is.
They really planted the seeds for a better future.
They did.
Not just for women, but for everyone.
Exactly.
So where do we go from here? We've traced this journey from, pre-war domesticity to that wartime workforce, and then to these seeds of a movement for equality.
Right.
What are the key takeaways so far?
Well, I think
What should our listener be thinking about?
one of the most important lessons is that change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's a slow and gradual process.
Yeah.
With both progress and pushback.
Ups and downs.
Yeah, exactly.
And even in the face of those setbacks,
Yeah.
those seeds of change can still blossom into something transformative.
They can.
I'm thinking about that drop in workforce participation after the war.
Right.
It seemed like a loss, but those experiences weren't erased.
No, they weren't.
They fueled the fight that came later.
Exactly.
So the other key takeaway
Yeah.
is that individual actions matter.
They do.
Those women who stepped up during the war
Yeah.
challenged norms,
Yeah.
fought for their rights.
They made a difference.
Yeah.
And we can too.
What a powerful message.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play
We do.
in shaping a more just and equitable future.
Absolutely.
I think that's a perfect lead-in to our final part. We'll be right back. We've been unpacking this impact of World War II on women's roles.
Yeah.
And there's this lingering question. Did women ultimately lose all that ground that they gained during the war?
Right.
Or did those experiences actually become the foundation for later progress?
Yeah. It's a question historians have been wrestling with for decades.
Yeah.
It's easy to see that post-war push.
Yeah.
For women to return to domesticity as a defeat.
Right. Especially with that decline in workforce participation.
Right.
Seems like those gains just vanished.
It's tempting to see it that way.
Yeah.
But I think it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
There was this effort to reassert those traditional gender roles.
Right.
But the genie was already out of the bottle.
So you're saying wartime experiences fundamentally changed something?
Exactly.
Like in the collective consciousness?
Yeah, women had tasted independence.
Right.
They'd proven their competence.
Yeah.
And a lot of them just weren't content to go back.
To the way things were.
Yeah.
It's like planting a seed.
Yeah.
Even if you try to bury it,
Right.
it can still grow,
Exactly.
break through.
That's a perfect analogy.
So those seeds of change during the war continued to germinate
They did.
in the years that followed.
And they might not have borne fruit immediately,
Right.
but they laid the groundwork.
For the later movement.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile those two things?
Yeah.
Like the push for these traditional roles
Right.
and then the seeds of change being sown simultaneously.
It's like a pendulum swing,
Okay.
Society reacts to rapid change
Yeah.
with a pullback to the familiar,
Right.
but that doesn't erase the progress that's been made.
So the post-war period wasn't a complete regression,
Right.
but more of a recalibration.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
A time of readjustment.
But those wartime experiences left a mark,
They did a permanent one.
and they continued to shape women's lives.
Yeah.
Even if the changes weren't immediately apparent.
Exactly.
Think about the impact on those who actually worked during the war.
Yeah.
They carried those lessons with them
They did.
of self-reliance and capability
Throughout their lives.
and passed those lessons on
Exactly.
to their daughters.
Creating a ripple effect.
Yeah, across generations,
Exactly. And those ripples eventually became waves.
leading to the resurgence of the movement in the 60s and beyond.
Exactly.
So bottom line,
Yeah.
did World War II plant those seeds?
I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Okay.
The war may not have ushered in immediate equality,
Right.
but it was a turning point.
It challenged those assumptions about women's capabilities
It did.
and their place in society.
It really challenged the definition of a woman's place.
Yeah.
Showing that they could thrive outside of those boxes.
So the war ended, but those seeds remained.
They did.
And eventually blossomed into a movement.
That transformed the lives of women.
For generations to come.
Yeah.
Wow, what a journey we've taken today.
It has been.
From the pre-war domestic sphere to that wartime workforce.
Right.
And then to those seeds of a movement.
It really highlights the impact of that period on women's roles in America.
It speaks volumes about their resilience.
It does.
And the determination.
They'll be seen as equal partners. Yeah.
In shaping the future.
It leaves us with a lot to ponder.
It does.
How do those experiences from the past shape our present and our future?
Those are great questions.
What other ripple effects are we still experiencing today?
The echoes of the past.
Yeah.
They reverberate through time.
What a thought-provoking note to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Into this pivotal point in history.
It's always so rewarding to explore these stories.
Until next time, everyone.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning.
Yeah.
And keep pushing for a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.